Hallelujah. Christ is risen.
Christ is risen indeed. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Yeah, boy, it seems awfully good to be saying those words. I can never say it enough. And I don't know about you, but I know at Incarnate Word, it's kind of fun just kind of blurting that out at random places in the worship service. And in non-Lutheran style, the bunch of Lutherans in the pews start shouting that back out. It's kind of really fun to see that,
I know we have great congregations who know just what to do.
Yeah. So that's awesome. Well, welcome. It's good to have you back with us again as we now journey into the season of Easter. We're privileged to journey with you through the season of Lent, dealing with Jesus' parables. And our family, including this little girl right here, we get to journey with you now in the season of Easter. And I think today we just really want to focus on the variety of Easter resurrection occurrences, but specifically I think the variety of responses to the resurrection appearances, because they're varied and it's all in one gospel. They're varied responses.
I love that from Good Friday up until really the third Sunday of Easter, we have all readings from John's Gospel, and we start with the Passion account from John, and we go all the way through, to the end of John's Gospel, to these different resurrection accounts and all the different characters that we encounter. It's sometimes too bad that we break these things up by the week. It would be really great to have one continuous reading of everything in John's Gospel, but that would mean probably 3-hour service, maybe
Probably.
4.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think anybody would put up with us that long.
Well, I would put up with you for that long.
Oh, thank you. Well, you better say that. You're married to me.
Yeah, that's right. Yep, absolutely.
But there's so many great characters, and if we just look at these resurrection accounts, it's so exciting to look at these different characters. We start with Mary Magdalene. The first person, she's the first witness to the resurrection. She comes before dawn when it's still dark. And I think, even in that imagery, she's still living in the darkness. That's not an accident that he uses the light to tell where things are. So Mary Magdalene is still living in darkness, still, mired in death. Yeah. She comes to the tomb and she's so blinded by her grief that even when she looks in the tomb and sees 2 angels, she doesn't recognize them. She doesn't see that as anything unusual, evidently, because she can't see past her own pain.
Right.
They tell her that Jesus is risen. She turns away from the tomb, still crying, literally bumps into Jesus and doesn't recognize him. It's like how grief can so blind us to God's presence with us. That's so real.
Yeah.
But it's when she hears one word that all of a sudden it's like the lights come on. Like the sun rises, you can imagine the heavenly choir singing, a beautiful D major chord, and everything like that, because she hears her name. She hears Mary. And all of a sudden everything makes sense. Everything that Jesus had talked about comes back to her, and she gets it. And she goes back to the disciples with the words, "I have seen the Lord."
And when I hear that story of Jesus calling out Mary's name, it can't be an accident. I'm reminded of Isaiah 43, where the prophet says for God, "I have called you by name. You are mine."
Right.
And I think that is a very powerful image. I'm reminded, actually, just a side note on that. So we have a banner at Incarnate Word, a homemade banner with Isaiah 43 with that phrase on it. It actually belonged to the late Pastor Bob Wennerstrom, who folks at Incarnate Word know and love dearly. And I remember that in his final days at the Episcopal home, that banner was by his bedside. And how comforting it must have been to be able just to kind of turn to that banner and see those words for him and for us. I have called you by name, you are mine. And again, that for anybody to know that God knows them by name is powerful, because it says you're not alone. You're not alone in the darkness. You're not alone in the grief and the brokenness. I am with you. I can't think of anything much more comforting than that.
Right. And even earlier in John's gospel, we get that with the whole good shepherd, where, Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. I know my own and my own know me, just as the Father knows me. And so, Jesus knows the sheep by name. Yeah. And the same thing, that same imagery. So Mary gets it. So Mary turns away. She is on the road, ready to go, ready to be a witness, ready to proclaim. Of course, then we have the other disciple, the other disciple, the unknown beloved disciple, who doesn't even have to go in the tomb. He kind of comes, looks in, sees, and even the Greek conveys the idea of understanding. He gets it right away, turns around, and he's on the road proclaiming.
Right.
Then we have Peter.
Then we have Peter. Poor old Peter. Boy, he gets a varied account, doesn't he? Of just from denial to desertion. And even running to the tomb alongside the beloved disciple, he doesn't get there first. And unlike the beloved disciple who sees and understands without having to go in the tomb, it's like Peter still doesn't get it. He has to go into the tomb. He sees the empty grave clothes, and apparently he doesn't see with his heart yet, even totally, because today, in today's gospel reading,
a week later,
actually no, that very night.
I'm sorry, that's right, that very night.
Where is Peter, presumably? Well, with the other disciples, and where are they?
They're locked away in a room with the door locked, and of course the windows will be locked. With the way houses were in the first century, even in Jerusalem, they opened onto the street. So you can imagine that the disciples are all huddled together in the dark, and probably whispering because they didn't want anyone to hear them that they were in there. So imagine the silence and the darkness. What does that sound like?
Sounds like a tomb.
A tomb. So they are literally sitting in the tomb. They're literally sitting in the place of death. And even though Mary came to tell them about the resurrection, that she had seen Jesus, they are still mired in death. They can't grasp it.
Yeah.
And then that evening, when the disciples come, she's distracting me. When Jesus comes, they're in darkness, and all of a sudden Jesus is with them, just shows up with those wonderful words, peace be with
you. And then he breathes his spirit on them.
Right. And what comfort that is. Think about this, because my guess is not only are the disciples afraid of the Jewish leadership, they're probably afraid of the Romans, because this just happened on Friday. I mean, this is just a couple days later.
Right.
And, are they going to be looking for them? So they're hiding out from that. They don't want to be arrested and crucified.
Right.
And already Peter has been recognized as one of them. But what did Jesus tell them to do? He said, stay awake with me. They couldn't stay awake in the garden. When he talked about his death, Peter said, oh, Lord, I will go with you even to death. And at the first sign of trouble,
how did that work out?
Peter hightails it the other way.
Right, yep.
And so the disciples are scattered. They've done nothing that Jesus had told them to do. And I wonder if when they hear the news that, Mary has seen Jesus and he's up and alive and walking around, it's not just the shock of that, but, oh my gosh, is he going to be looking for us? And is he going to be ticked off at us? And are the lightning bolts and fireballs going to fly?
Right.
So they are really living. Think about that. All of the stuff they're living with.
So imagine how relieved they must have felt when Jesus' first words to them were peace. And I always maintain that peace, whenever big things are about to happen, God or those messengers of God always declare first peace.
Right. And then we have, a week later, we have Thomas, and Thomas is not there. And we always talk about doubting Thomas, but Thomas is no different than the other disciples. And even Thomas, who says, I will not believe, Jesus greets him with peace, shows him his hands, shows him his side.
Actually, we don't know that Thomas was ever really locked behind closed doors. I mean,
that's true.
The first batch of disciples, they were for sure, but he wasn't with them. Who knows where he was?
Yeah.
But so again, I think Thomas is
fascinating character.
He is. There's a lot we don't know about him, and that's maybe what makes him fascinating. But again, I think he's so broken with grief that he's not willing just to depend upon the words of his friends that Jesus is alive. He needs to see it for himself.
Right. And then moving on to the beach scene in John 21.
Got to have a beach scene. Absolutely. You got to have a beach scene. Lots of fish, lots of food.
And of course, Peter is the main character of this scene. You know, where Jesus, comes to the disciples and everything, and they still don't recognize him. But then when they finally do, Jesus says to Peter, "Do you love me?" 3 times. What do you make of that?
Well, I've often said I'm not a scholar on this, but and many scholars who are scholars disagree. But I think that language is important, and I think that there obviously we know there are many different words, Greek words for love. All have different meanings. Of course, the love that we're accustomed to, God so loved the world he gave his only son, is that agape love. It's that all-encompassing, it's that sacrificing everything, giving it all. It's I would take a bullet for you kind of love. And that, interestingly to me, the first 2 times Jesus asks Peter, "Do you love me?" He's asking the agape. Peter, do you agape me?
But Peter doesn't respond that way.
He doesn't. And yet you miss that in the in
because
the
we only have one love. Because Peter responds, "Yes, Lord, I philos you," which is more the love of humanity, the love that we are all in this together. It's where we get the word Philadelphia.
Brotherly love.
Yes, philanthropy, those kinds of things. But Peter isn't quite getting to agape. He says, "Yes, I philos you, Lord, but not I agape you."
Yeah. Until finally, the 3rd time Jesus asks Peter the question of love, he doesn't use the Greek word agape. Instead, we have the word philos. Peter, do you philos me? And that's where I think Peter gets it, where it's all of a sudden, because Peter goes away crying. I mean, he's weeping. He's broken down by that because...
Why do you keep asking me?
Yeah, and then I think Peter finally gets it. Oh my gosh, Jesus was asking me about agape, and I was answering with the brotherly kind of love.
And of course, Jesus' response to that, the questions of love, of agape, is feed my sheep.
Feed my sheep.
Which is who we are to be and what we are to be about. So all these different responses to the resurrection, and my guess is that we can find ourselves in each one at different times, along our faith journey. Times when we just embrace everything like the beloved disciple. Times when we're a little slow to come to it, like maybe Mary Magdalene. Times when we have trouble believing, like Thomas. And times when we are really slow and a little dense sometimes, and when we have to be knocked over the head, like Peter.
Yeah.
And isn't that comforting to know that in all of those situations, Jesus comes offering peace.
And offering a commission, saying, don't stay in the tomb, go and feed. And as wounded as you are, as broken as you are, go and feed my sheep. There's still something for you to do. I cherish you. I value you, I think is what he's saying to them. Go and feed my sheep. I've got this. I'm gonna be with you. You're gonna be okay. Just go feed my sheep.
So those are the resurrection accounts in John and the ones we've been living with for these weeks. So I hope you enjoy. My suggestion is take a look at all of them. Read them through without stopping, and you'll kind of get a sense of where everything's going. And it's wonderful being with you through this journey, through Lent, and even now into this post-resurrection time. So blessings to you this Easter season and always.
And let me think, there was one other thing I was going to say to you. Alleluia. Christ is risen.
Christ is risen indeed. Alleluia.